Picture this. It's a quiet Monday morning in Detroit. The sun hasn't even risen high when workers arrive at the factory gates, only to find them chained shut. A single piece of paper taped to the metal fence tells them what no one ever imagined possible. Effective immediately, this facility is closed. For 50,000 American families, generations who built cars with pride, their world collapses in an instant. Assembly lines that once defined the American dream now sit silent. Fathers, mothers, sons, and daughters ask the same question with trembling voices. What just happened? And the answer, shocking as it may sound, is simple. Africa happened. Not Mexico, not Europe, not even Southeast Asia. The factories that once fueled Detroit's heartbeat are being rebuilt thousands of miles away in Accra, Lagos, and Nairobi. For the first time in history, 5 of Asia's biggest automakers have turned their backs on the United States and chosen Africa as their new home. They didn't come out of charity. They came because Africa prepared modern industrial zones, cheap, renewable energy, millions of young engineers ready to work, and governments hungry for growth. This isn't just about cars. It's about power. It's about who gets to shape the future of technology, mobility, and dignity. For America, the unthinkable has arrived. Detroit is no longer the capital of the car. For Africa, it is the dawn of a new industrial revolution. So here's the question we must face. If the world's next Detroit is rising in Africa, what does that mean for America's future and for the balance of power across the globe? Please share this video if you feel you are among the first to recognize and support Africa's awakening. And subscribe if you believe that the truth is more important than the headlines. The spark that lit this fire came from Washington. With a single executive order, President Trump imposed a 25% tariff on every car and part not made in the United States. For some economists, it was the end of 3 decades of free trade across North America, a policy that had shaped the modern auto industry. Overnight, what had been business as usual turned into chaos. In Detroit, Ohio, and Kentucky, managers called emergency meetings. Suppliers froze shipments. By dawn the next day, the first notices were out, factories preparing to shut down, entire towns bracing for layoffs. 50,000 American jobs, union paychecks, health insurance, pensions suddenly dangling by a thread. Families who had believed their livelihoods were safe now faced uncertainty that felt like betrayal. And while panic spread in America's industrial heartland, something entirely different was happening thousands of miles away. At the headquarters of the African Union in Addis Ababa, a press conference unfolded that would change global history. Side by side sat executives from Toyota, Hyundai, Tata Motors, Kia, and Suzuki, 5 giants who had powered the American middle class for decades. But this time, they weren't sitting in Detroit or Tokyo. They were flanked by African leaders from Ethiopia, Kenya, Nigeria, Ghana, and South Africa. Together, they announced a staggering $120 billion investment package that would build not just assembly plants, but entire automotive ecosystems across Africa. The details were breathtaking. Each plant would be part of a larger hub, complete with battery production facilities, research centers for electric and autonomous vehicles, and local supply chains designed to keep value on African soil. These companies committed to sourcing at least 40% of their parts from African suppliers within 5 years, a pledge that would ignite entire industries: steel, glass, rubber, electronics. In Lagos, Accra, Nairobi, Johannesburg, and Addis Ababa, construction blueprints were already being unveiled. Bulldozers and cranes were preparing to carve out what leaders called the new Detroits of Africa. This was not charity. The automakers made clear that they had run the numbers, weighed the future, and chosen Africa deliberately. For them, the continent offered what America no longer could: a young, skilled workforce eager to innovate. Cheap, renewable energy from hydroelectric dams and solar farms, governments offering land grants, tax breaks, and free trade zones, and a consumer market projected to be worth $2.5 trillion by 2030. It was a vision of speed and scale. While America bogged companies down with bureaucracy, Africa promised faster construction timelines, fewer regulatory roadblocks, and real partnership. Where Washington demanded loyalty through threats, African capitals offered collaboration through opportunity. For the 5 automakers, the choice was clear. Detroit might have been the motor city of the past, but Africa was the engine of the future. To understand the scale, consider this: within 3 years, cars stamped "Made in Africa" will be rolling off brand new assembly lines. Not second-hand imports, not knockoffs. Brand new electric SUVs, hybrids, and next-generation vehicles powered by African-made batteries. For the first time, Africa would not just assemble cars for someone else, it would design, innovate, and export its own. The symbolism was impossible to ignore. Detroit once embodied American pride, freedom, and innovation. Today, those very symbols were being reborn in Africa's industrial parks. And as the announcement echoed through Addis Ababa's conference hall, the message to Washington could not have been clearer. The future of the automobile no longer belongs to America. It belongs to Africa. The climax came in Addis Ababa inside a hall draped with the flags of Africa. At the headquarters of the African Union, cameras flashed as 5 of Asia's largest automakers sat shoulder to shoulder with presidents and ministers from across the continent. Behind them, a massive banner read, "The future of the automobile is African." Executives took turns outlining their commitments. Toyota promised an advanced electric vehicle design lab in Nairobi. Hyundai revealed plans for Africa's first fully electric SUV to be developed at its Lagos facility. Tata spoke of training 20,000 engineers in Ethiopia. Kia and Suzuki announced joint battery plants in Ghana and South Africa. The figures were staggering: $120 billion in investment, tens of thousands of direct jobs, and millions more across supply chains. The crowd erupted when an African leader declared, "For decades, our raw materials fueled the world's cars. From now on, those cars will be built here by our own hands." The symbolism was overwhelming. A continent once dismissed as a dumping ground for used vehicles was now being celebrated as the birthplace of the next automotive revolution. Back in Washington, the mood could not have been more different. The White House Situation Room was described as tense, even panicked. Advisors scrambled to explain how corporations that had operated in America for over half a century could walk away so abruptly. Senators lined up in front of television cameras, demanding hearings, shouting about tariffs and betrayal. Buy American campaigns were relaunched overnight. But beneath the slogans, everyone knew the truth: Washington had pushed too hard and Africa had offered too much. In Detroit, the shock was personal. Workers stood outside shuttered plants, some holding back tears, others furious. "My father worked here, my grandfather worked here, and now it's gone," one man told reporters. Local diners and shops emptied as suppliers announced they would close within weeks. It wasn't just jobs vanishing. It was a way of life, a cultural identity tied to the American car. Meanwhile, Wall Street reacted instantly. Shares of Ford and General Motors tumbled as analysts downgraded their outlooks. Hedge funds shifted billions into African infrastructure bonds and industrial parks. To investors, the message was clear: the growth story of the next decade would be written not in Michigan, but in Lagos and Accra. And then came the global ripple. European officials, stunned, admitted privately that they could not compete with Africa's package of cheap renewable energy and a vast youthful workforce. Asian governments, especially Japan and South Korea, celebrated the deals as strategic victories, solidifying ties with Africa while bypassing Washington. But the most striking reaction came from ordinary Africans. Social media exploded with pride. Hashtags like Makmai's Drive Africa, Ma Made in Africa, and Oshar's Goodbye Detroit surged to the top of global trends. Videos of bulldozers breaking ground in Ghana and Ethiopia went viral. Young engineers posted selfies at recruitment fairs declaring, "We are the generation building Africa's future." For millions who had grown up watching their countries export raw minerals and import secondhand goods, this moment felt like vindication. The emotional contrast was undeniable. In the American Rust Belt, grief and anger. In Africa, jubilation and hope. In Washington, fear of lost leverage. In Addis Ababa, confidence and pride. The world was witnessing not just an economic shift, but a symbolic one. Power was leaving the old centers and flowing toward a continent long underestimated. This was the high point of the story, the turning of the tide. Factories that once defined America's strength were now symbols of its fragility. And Africa, once written out of the script of global industry, was suddenly at the very center of the stage. The aftershocks of the announcement rippled far beyond boardrooms and factory floors. They struck at the heart of ordinary lives, shaping politics, culture, and the very idea of security on both sides of the Atlantic. In America's Rust Belt, the collapse felt like a second Great Depression. In towns across Michigan and Ohio, restaurants emptied, schools warned of budget cuts, and local governments scrambled to replace tax revenue that once came from thriving auto plants. Every closed factory triggered a domino effect. Suppliers went bankrupt, diners lost their customers, and entire neighborhoods slipped into decline. For older workers, retraining programs felt like empty promises. "I'm 55," one laid-off machinist told a reporter. "You think I can just learn coding overnight?" His voice cracked not from anger, but from exhaustion. Politically, the blow was devastating. Swing states that had been narrowly won in recent elections suddenly found themselves at the center of a storm. 50,000 lost jobs translated into 50,000 angry households. Town hall meetings turned into shouting matches. Senators demanded investigations into the automakers' decision. Presidential candidates seized on the crisis, blaming everything from globalization to foreign governments. Yet beneath the noise, a grim truth lingered. America had been warned for decades to invest in its infrastructure and workforce, and it had failed to do so. Meanwhile, in Africa, the same announcement ignited a wave of optimism. Cities like Lagos and Nairobi, once symbols of overcrowding and unemployment, were rebranding themselves as centers of high-tech industry. Billboards went up promising careers for the future. Universities rushed to expand engineering programs. Parents who once saved to send their children abroad now told them, "Your opportunity is here." The shift was more than economic. It was cultural, even psychological. For generations, Africa had been treated as a source of raw materials, cobalt, rubber, and copper shipped abroad to fuel foreign factories. Now, those same resources would be processed, refined, and turned into finished products on African soil. This was dignity reclaimed, a rewriting of centuries of exploitation. The political implications were just as profound. African leaders, long accustomed to begging for aid or negotiating from weakness, suddenly spoke with new confidence. "If you want our resources," one president declared, "you will build here, you will hire here, and you will respect us as equals." Deals were structured with clauses requiring technology transfers, local sourcing, and environmental standards, terms that would have been unthinkable a decade ago. Back in Washington, lawmakers faced an uncomfortable reality. Tariffs had backfired. Instead of forcing companies to expand in America, they had driven them away. Sanctions, too, seemed powerless. No single country could be punished without sparking a broader trade war. The United States found itself cornered, unable to bully corporations, unable to dictate terms, watching as leverage slipped through its fingers. The civil and political consequences could not have been clearer. In America, disillusionment, polarization, and fear of decline. In Africa, pride, opportunity, and a surge of political independence. The same decision that closed the gates in Detroit had opened the doors of history in Lagos and Accra. And the message was undeniable. The balance of dignity and power was shifting. For the United States, the loss of 50,000 auto jobs was more than an economic crisis. It was an identity crisis. Detroit, once the proud Motor City, symbolized American innovation, freedom, and middle-class prosperity. To see that symbol dismantled and rebuilt in Africa cut deeper than statistics. It raised the uncomfortable question, if America could lose its crown in automobiles, what else could it lose? Aerospace, electronics, energy. The fear was not simply about jobs. It was about status, about watching the world move on without waiting for Washington's approval. Inside the White House, advisors whispered about sanctions and countermeasures, but none seemed realistic. How do you punish 5 multinational corporations that operate across continents? How do you sanction Africa when America still relies on its cobalt, lithium, and rare earths for its own green transition? The truth was hard to accept. America's leverage had weakened, and the world knew it. Globally, the announcement reshaped alliances overnight. In Europe, officials fretted that Africa's new industrial base would undercut their own factories. In Asia, leaders from Japan and South Korea celebrated the success of their automakers, framing it as proof of Asia's enduring partnership with Africa. In Latin America, commentators began asking if their own governments could replicate Africa's model of industrial zones, cheap energy, and youth-driven labor markets. But perhaps the most profound reaction came from within Africa itself. For years, Africa news had been dominated by stories of poverty, instability, or conflict. Suddenly, the headlines shifted: industrial revolution, mega investments, and sovereign partnerships. Hashtags like Nanak Made in Africa trended not as slogans but as reality. African presidents walked into international summits with new confidence. No longer supplicants asking for aid, they were negotiators holding trillion-dollar markets in their hands. And here the story ties back to leaders like President Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso. His call for African nations to seize control of their resources and demand respect had often been dismissed in Western media as youthful rhetoric. But as factories rise across the continent, his words now sound prophetic. When Traoré told the world that Africa would no longer be the last link in the chain, but the first chapter of a new order, many doubted him. Today, those doubts look misplaced. For older Americans watching this unfold, the contrast is jarring. On the one hand, headlines of plant closures in Ohio. On the other, images of ribbon-cutting ceremonies in Accra. The global economy has shifted, and for the first time, Africa is not following, it is leading. This is the new geopolitical reality, a multipolar economy where the United States no longer dictates the terms alone. The auto industry may be the first sector to fall, but it will not be the last. Electronics, pharmaceuticals, even aerospace may follow the same path. The world is asking itself, if Africa can build cars, why not everything else? And America, once the unquestioned leader, must now face the truth that the center of gravity is moving south. The story of Detroit's silence and Africa's roar is not just about cars. It is about the turning of an age. For over a century, America's automobile industry was proof that the nation could build, innovate, and lead. But now those very symbols of strength are being dismantled and rebuilt on African soil. Factories in Michigan stand empty while cranes rise in Lagos. For American workers, this is heartbreak. For young Africans, it is the dawn of hope. But make no mistake, this shift carries warnings. Once industries move, they rarely return. Once supply chains are rewritten, they rarely bend back. The United States can scramble with tariffs, subsidies, or sanctions, but time cannot be bribed and the future cannot be bullied. The world has changed, and America is waking up too late. For Africa, the challenge is equally immense. Industrial revolutions bring growth but also responsibility. If corruption, mismanagement, or foreign interference creep in, the dream could falter. But if leaders remain vigilant, if they insist on sovereignty, transparency, and fair partnerships, then this moment could mark not just a chapter, but a new book in global history. This is where names like President Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso matter. His insistence that Africa must process its own resources, train its own engineers, and dictate its own terms is no longer a distant vision. It is happening before our eyes. And it is not only Burkina Faso, it is Ghana, Nigeria, Kenya, Ethiopia, South Africa. Together they are proving that the continent, once written off as dependent, can rise as independent, equal, and proud. So what does this mean for you, the viewer? It means that the headlines of Tomorrow Africa News will shape your economy, your markets, and your politics more than you might imagine. It means that the balance of power your generation grew up with is dissolving before your eyes. And it means that you must decide, will you cling to nostalgia or will you recognize the new reality and adapt to it? Let me ask you plainly, do you think that President Ibrahim Traoré's national reform strategies are truly effective yet? Or should Africa prepare for another leader to continue this transformation? Please share this video if you feel you are among the first to witness and support Africa's rise under leaders like Traoré. And subscribe if you believe the truth is more important than the headlines. Because the wheels of history are turning, and for the first time, Africa is in the driver's seat.